Today we are learning basketball with Ku Khahil, media member of the Detroit Pistons and host of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Can't wait to dive in today, but first, how you doing today, Ku?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm feeling a little tired, but, we're all good. Just chilling all day, really, today, so I'm feeling good.
There you go. If you need a coffee break at some point, just say the word. We'll get a little espresso and get right back in here. But,
I've already had myself a Starbucks coffee today, so I can't go another one.
Yeah, gotta limit the caffeine to realistic. But, the Pistons don't need no coffee. They're flying around. 7-game win streak right now. And, to start throwing off some stats off the top, I mean, they're 15th in point differential on the season, kind of middle of the pack offensively, but 10th overall defensively. And both of those ratings seem to be really high because they're rebounding. They're top 10 on both sides of the floor. But then in the last month, they have that 7-0 record, 9-4 over the last month. And, in that month, they're 7th in point differential, 7th best team in the league in terms of how badly they're beating other teams, and 5th on offense, while the defense has stayed strong with 10th. And I was going to ask you, what have you seen kind of the last month that might be a little different? And we'll check the schedule a little bit. The big wins kind of came the last two, I think, against Atlanta and the Clippers were really some like marquee wins compared to some of the other little lighter schedules like Spurs without Wemby and a couple Bulls matchups after the trade. So, that a couple things can be scheduled losses or whatever, but this is the longest win streak since 2015 for Detroit. So, it's really impressive. What's been going on this last month?
I think the two main things is the play of Ausar Thompson and Jalen Duren. I think, obviously, they're spearheaded by their franchise player, Cade Cunningham. Obviously, he's at the head of all of it. If Cade isn't as great as he is, then they're not going to be as good as they are. I think that's the given. So I don't want to spend too much time just talking about Cade, although, yes, he's been great, and he's their leader. And he's taken that step as all-NBA guy. The other things that have happened that really allowed them to make this jump is other players have joined the development curve with him. And Ausar Thompson and Jalen Duren have been playing much better since the change of the new year. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Jalen Duren started to play a lot better once Ausar Thompson was put into the starting lineup on January 1st. So you said a few of the stats. Since January 1st, they're like a top 5 defense. They're like a 10th, a little bit over a little middle of the pack offense. But their defense has been lights out since Ausar Thompson has joined the rotation. And his impact defensively has been just otherworldly. The dude's a crazy defender. He's an alien-like defender. And he's such a good defender that him just being on the court completely warps the Pistons defense. In the month of December, they were the third worst defense in the entire NBA. And then as soon as Ausar Thompson joined the lineup, they went to one of the best defenses in the league. And that's not a coincidence. Along with that, Ausar Thompson's being a lot more aggressive as a scorer and trying to get to the basket a lot more, and they've put the ball in his hands more as a secondary playmaker, and that's really brought a lot of good results for the Pistons. And Jalen Duren, I just talked about him on the podcast today as well. The first 37 games of the year or so, the Pistons took the ball out of his hands because he was turning the ball over so much. And JB basically with his actions said, we don't really trust you with the ball. And that's supposed to be what makes Jalen Duren special. That's supposed to be what makes him different from other bigs, is what he's able to do with the ball in his hands and what he's able to do playmaking-wise. And if you take that away, he's no longer really that special. But over the last month and a half, I shot out some of these numbers. He has his turnover percentage went from 21% to around 15%. His usage rate has now went from 15% to around 17.5%. They're putting the ball in his hands a lot more. He's turning the ball over a lot less, and he's creating a lot more offense for the Pistons and scoring a lot more. He had a streak over this win streak of 6 straight games of 5+ assists. He's been playing great. He's been giving more energy on the defensive end. So, yeah, Cade's great, but having two other guys who are also developing and taking that next step with him over the last month and a half is really what's changed a lot of things for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave them both a shout because they're, some exciting pieces of this young core that I really wanted to dive into. And I'm sure we'll hit a little more on Cade in a second, but just the idea that Duren has made a leap. And I've noticed on your Twitter feed how you've given some shout outs to his handoff passing hub. And like you just mentioned that, his ability to flip the ball back and forth and that quick processing as a playmaker has really shined recently. And, I've always wanted to kind of see that Ivy Duren pick and roll as a lob threat and see what that could look like with shooters around it. So I wanted to ask a popular narrative that I think has some truth to it, but maybe not defines the entire season, is that the biggest jump from like the past few years around Cade to this year is simply surrounding him with some veteran floor spacing scorers. That, Malik Beasley obviously is the one that is just shooting absolutely lights out. Zach Lowe had this crazy stat the other day on him, how only one player in NBA history has hit over 42% on 3-pointers while attempting at least 11 of those threes per 36 minutes, and that's Steph Curry. But he's done it 5 times. But this year, Malik Beasley is on pace to do it. And so that's just, unfathomable to think about him as a shooter. And obviously Tobias has slid right in as well, just a reliable scorer, veteran guy that can space the floor, and just, a good basketball player, even since like his rookie, sophomore year, early years with like targeted as a prospect in Milwaukee and then Orlando and bouncing around. Like, just, what you're getting with Tobias. So, how much of a factor has these veterans been that Detroit has added to the success of the team this year, compared to, like you mentioned already, the development of Ausar and Ivey and Duren, and hopefully Ivey comes back soon. I thought he was making a real leap before the injury, and I'm glad you shouted out Ausar, man. He's just one of my favorite prospects. Obviously, Amen, his twin brother, gets a ton of the praise as well, and making these highlight plays. But I'm glad Ausar is finally just playing. Like you said, he's starting. That's been a huge part of their success, especially defensively. I think he's like just as impressive defensively. He's one of these just uber athletes who just block shots all over the place. I want to say with Overtime Elite, he made like twice as many blocks as his brother Amen. And I'm not trying to compare the two, but just to put in perspective how great Ausar is, while Amen gets a lot of credit on the national stage as well, that, he just does a ton. So I'd love to kind of hear from your perspective, seeing up close, what really are some of the biggest differences between, the past few years and today?
Well, I do think just having competence around Cade changes a lot. Like, I don't think people who didn't watch the Pistons last year, and for good reason, they won 14 games. But the team that they had made no sense, and combined with the team they had making no sense, the head coach didn't really care. So the roster construction wasn't good, and the coach was questionable at the very least, and obviously got fired after 1 year into like a record-breaking head coaching contract. It was a combination of just horrible stuff going on. So just simply adding spacers and simply adding quality players, not all-stars, not great players, just simply adding quality role players, I think does make a crazy difference for the Pistons. I mean, Cade was some of the players that played the most minutes last year for the Pistons was Killian Hayes, Marvin Bagley, and James Wiseman. Like, that's just that can't happen. So having Tobias on the floor, an actual modern 2025 power forward on your roster, in your starting lineup, instead of having a 5 who isn't really a 4, or a 3 that's too small to play the 4, they have an actual 4 guy, and that's why his on-off is like the largest on the team, because he's really the only guy that can serve that role with the Pistons. And then you brought up Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley's having like one of the greatest shooting seasons we've seen. Like, it's crazy. You brought up that stat. It's actually crazy to see that Steph's done it 5 times and no other player's done it one. Like, Steph's crazy, dude.
Right.
But yeah, Malik's having a fantastic season. Even THJ, I know THJ gets, a lot of people poke fun at him, but THJ, his quick trigger and it like insistent on shooting the ball, and he goes through these hot runs where he'll just hit like 6 threes in a row instantly. So him being able to do that and having that quick trigger provides a level of gravity on the floor that they just haven't had in other seasons. I think they really do benefit a ton from having that with him. I know he, maybe takes some bad shots sometimes and is not the greatest defender, but what he does bring with that gravity and his shot making, I really do think helps them a ton. So I really do think that, along with the development of those other guys, just simply having competent veterans has been like a world of difference, not only on the court, but off the court. They've been tremendous in the locker room and off the court. The guys love them. Yeah, so I can't say enough good things about the veterans that Trajan Langdon brought in.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave THA a shout. I think he's just in the perfect role here, just for the same reason as the perfect role in Dallas, compared to all his other stops like New York and Atlanta, where he used to be asked to be on the ball, and now he can just be off the ball, spread the floor, threaten that catch and shoot 3-point shot, or attack the closeout, and just an ideal like 3-point shooting role player that can complement a superstar like that, where, obviously you also, would like defense from all your role players as well. So it's, a give and take with finding that floor balance. But offensively, I just think he's just fits so cleanly right, playing off of especially Cade and also an Ivy and some of the other, downhill guys on the team that, like you said, just spaces the floor for good reason. And on Cade, I'll hit on, some of it. I'd also want to hear about. I saw your tweet the other day. You asked him about how his floater and his hook shots are kind of opening up the rest of his game. How the mid range, gets this rap as like inefficient, but it's not if you're good at it and if you're a star who's allowed to take it. It's really just that the average shot from the role players that aren't as good at it probably shouldn't be a tough mid-range shot because it turns into kind of a bad possession. But, if you're a Trae Young or a Cade Cunningham or someone that has a master floater like that, like it's a weapon. It's the shot defenses are giving you. So, go for it until you can kind of draw them in there and create some of the other things. So one crazy stat I saw that I'm sure you're aware of, Cade is on pace to be one of 7 players to average 25 points, 9 assists, 6 boards in a season. And it's just Hall of Fame MVPs that are on that list. Oscar, LeBron, Harden, Westbrook, Luka, Jokic, and now Cade. And Oscar's done that 8 times. Russ and LeBron have done that twice, which Oscar's always on these lists. I did a pod earlier on, who was it? It was Trae Young, who was also just like on all these lists with Oscar. So shout out Oscar Robertson, who I believe is Stan Van Gundy's GOAT. And when he gets asked that question, just random fun fact, he always he skips over all the LeBron Jordan drama. He's like, nah, it's Oscar Robertson. And if you look at all those stats, I mean, there's something there. And just a couple other stats real quick on Cade, like via synergy, just one of the most efficient scorers and creators out here in pick and roll, including passes. He's at 1.09 points per possession, which is 85th percentile of all players. And he's run over 1,000 pick and rolls, including those passes this year. So talk about a sample size. And then he's an efficient creator out of the post, 1.09 points per possession, 66th percentile, only 130 times in comparison, but efficient. And then also hitting his spot ups this year, 1.15 points per possession on 105 spot ups, 70th percentile. So, Cade seems to he gets a bad rap on the national scale because he just I think he gets a lot of the blame for the last few seasons in Detroit, when you can see it's night and day this year how if you surround a scoring creator type who can get his own bucket, create good looks for others with just an NBA rotation of level of 3-point spacing and capable scorers and shooters around that, and just some play finishers, and obviously the development of some of these other guys, he's a really special player. I mean, he's just putting, every time I look at the box score, it looks like a peak Westbrook game, like 30, 10, and 12, just type of triple-double. I won't go and list off his last few box scores because literally the whole season just looks like that, where you could pick any game blindfolded and it's going to be like a 30-point triple-double type of game. So, what is it about Cade? And I know we've hit on some of the other factors, but what kind of steps have you seen in his development this year for this success, where he could very well make an All-NBA team?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you brought up Russ. I saw Josh Eberle brought up, and he's brought up a few times that he kind of compares Cade to Russ. And it's not like play style wise, it's more so just like they're going to fill the stat sheet. Maybe not the most efficient player at any point in their career. They're not going to be hovering like 60 plus true shooting percentage. They're not going to be one of those guys, but their impact in contributing in multiple areas and stuffing the stat sheet and creating easy offense for their teammates and being high volume guys, they have that kind of same, kind of impact. I'm interested to see how that develops moving forward. He brought that up, and I've kind of been watching for it, so I thought it was interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, that box score production, like you said, not necessarily like the play style, the highlights or something, but like the end results when you look at the box score, eerily similar.
Right, exactly. I think what's really changed with Cade is his pull-up three-point shooting has really come along this year.
That Atlanta game. Sorry to interrupt.
It was crazy.
That's the one I just caught. I mean, good God.
It was crazy. And I talked with his trainer. I talked with his brother the last 2 off seasons. They've come on the podcast, and I've talked with them. And that's one of the things they've mentioned that they spent all last offseason working on, that they knew that the pull-up shooting that he had at Oklahoma State, that had to translate to the NBA for him to reach his next level. And they spent all offseason working on that. And you're seeing that come through. I know he went through a bit of a cold spell at the end of January, beginning of February with it, and kind of brought his percentages down. he was hovering around like 38%. He fell down to, I think, like 35.5. Though I think he jumped back up to 36 now after these last few crazy games. But either way, the pull-up three-point shooting has really come along, and that has changed a lot for him. You mentioned why I asked him about with his floaters. He's gone to his floater a lot more. I asked him before the year. It was a follow-up question. Before the year, I had also talked with his trainer about this, but I got to ask him at media day. He struggled at times to finish around the rim, have great finishing numbers. What was his, what's his idea of trying to improve those finishing numbers? And he brought up that maybe not taking the tough attempts at the rim, like trying to score at the rim over three people, maybe just taking one less dribble and settling for an open floater instead, he thinks will really help him. And I think that's 100% true. And I think that's really helped him this year as well. Last I checked, I haven't looked at – they took my Synergy account away, by the way, like a week and a half ago. It pissed me off so much. But last I checked, he was like 70th plus percentile on his floaters at that time. But the floater game has really helped him out. And then also, I don't know what his exact free throw attempts and free throw rate numbers are for the last month, but the last month or so, he's had a few games where he's getting 10-plus attempts at the line. He's drawing the free throws a lot more recently, and that really is what will unlock his game. If he can start drawing free throws like other stars can, that really will help his efficiency as well. So I think all of these things, I think Cade, and I really loved hearing this answer from him the other night when I asked him about it. He gave a real analytical answer. He talked about how, analytics don't really say you want to spend all your time in the mid-range. I know I have to get a lot more shots up from three. I know I want to get to the rim a lot more and get to the free throw line, so I've kind of tried to fix my shot diet to kind of fit that. It's not that he's eliminating the mid-range, but he's kind of turned a lot of those long twos that he took last year into pull-up threes instead, and some of those free throw or some of those attempts at the rim into either free throws and rim or floaters. So I think he's a very smart player. He's a very, very smart player. His team is incredibly smart. His trainer, his brother, who is his like training staff, they're incredibly smart people. They're very self-aware about what you have to work on. So I think all of that played a part into what is different for him this year. And lastly, I'd say is I think you're really starting to see what I believed. I mean, I've been a big believer in utilizing Cade's size versatility is one of the main things that should make him like a top player. If you're not utilizing that, you're not going to have that impact. And I think putting Ausar into that starting lineup where you still have THJ and you'd like to have a better replacement, defensively than THJ, but having Cade and Ausar there where it's like you have that size, that switchability defensively, I think you're really starting to see that, especially with him, Cade, Tobias, and Duren. You have that size, that length, and it's really allowed them to get steals and to push in transition where they've been absolutely deadly last month and a half. So I just feel like Trajan Langdon, the new GM, is really just understanding the best way of building around him and the best way of or putting a functional lineup on the floor around him. And I think Cade is just showing just how smart of a just hoop head he is. He's an incredibly high IQ player.
Yeah, and I think when a team has an elite defense, they can kind of play around with lineups to get away with maybe one. Like, I think you can get away with one minus defender on the floor. So we're not trying to like make this all about THJ. Like he fills out the lineup well and obviously brings that 3-point threat. Like against the Hawks, for instance, Cade dropped 7 threes. THJ was right there with 6 threes, and they both shot 10 of them. And Cade had 38, 12, and 7, 3 blocks and a steal. Just an insane back and forth. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, go watch Hawks Pistons for that one.
It was a great game.
Just an all timer. And yeah, I mean, I love to hear all that. It sounds like they're getting to that positionless versatility where your point guard is 6'6", but yet your power forward and center can also switch all across. And then, like you said, Ausar's defense having like I don't want to overhype it, but having like an all defensive level type of guy out there can really open up the floor for others. And at the end of the day, it comes out down to that lineup balance. So if you're able to provide two-way versatility, yeah, obviously, ideally in a playoff team trying to contend and for a championship, yeah, you want as few holes as possible. But, the Pistons are probably very happy to be here at this point in the season. Like, I don't know what they expected, but they're on the right trajectory. Everything doesn't have to be championship or bust when you're on the way up to contending, especially with a young core in place. Another like crazy stat I saw the other day was the Pistons are 6th on the year-to-year improvement in NBA history. They have the 6th highest increase in win percentage of any team
That's
in
only
NBA
going to go
history.
up.
And what's crazy as well is all the other ones are when great teams added great players, like the Celtics adding KG, the Spurs adding Duncan, Suns adding Nash, the Celtics drafting Larry Bird, and the Pistons just, added Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley and Tobias Harris, and this is happening. So, I mean, it's all a credit to all the things you mentioned between the difference in the coaching and the difference in development for a lot of these guys. And, speaking of development, Jaden Ivey's a guy that, really impressed me before he went down. I was watching. It was sad to see it happen. It was against the Magic, and, wish him a speedy recovery because he was really like putting things together. I've always thought, I've caught some of the big games he had early in his career. Like it was also against Orlando where he like would go off with pull up threes in the third quarter. And I've always thought he's a guy that like if that pull up three hits and can be consistent, is a really tough player to guard because he has that quick first step burst advantage every time out there, especially with the ball in his hands, improving as a passer, pick and roll guy, creator for the team, downhill, gets to the rim, and active defender, I think, as well, and just a great athlete that I would love to see kind of like the peak Pistons, which we got for a little bit, but Cade as the number 1, and then Ivey just finding that chemistry as the number 2 creator for this team so they can play together. And maybe they'll end up staggering until kind of the 3-point shooting really hits for both of them. And I'm glad you brought up Cade's 3-point shooting as well, because I think that when I was doing a redraft the other day with Esber Ahini of the 2021 redraft, and we're kind of head over heels for Evan Mobley still, like just this unicorn type guy. But we both had Cade still like in his own tier right there with Mobley, slightly ahead of Franz and Scotty and the rest of them. And he's a Raptors guy and I'm a Magic guy. So that says a lot that, the pull-up shooting, I think, is one of the big differentiators, but also Cade is just one of the most like well-rounded players you're going to find, like just the passing, the scoring creation, just a maniacal worker like you've talked about, where he's always trying to improve and understand the game better, great feel for the game and insane scores. So, credit to Cade finally being recognized a little bit this year. And I think, between the All-Star, the Pistons playoff success, they'll probably keep moving up in the East, looking at how that conference is shaking out right now, or at least very much stay put for the playoffs. I don't think very many teams are coming back anytime soon. So I think all those things should lead to finally, getting like an all NBA team and hopefully a competitive playoff series for Cade as well. So, what are the goals for this season for this team at this point now that, the team recognizes, they're a pretty competitive team out there?
You mentioned earlier that you don't know what exactly they were expecting for this year. I can tell you that they weren't expecting to be nearly this good at all. Trajan Langdon said it about 2 weeks before the deadline. He went on the Pistons Live, the show before the Pistons game, and said we did not expect to be here. We are much farther along than I expected us to be, and it was kind of along the talk of, well, does this change what you do at the deadline? Because it seemed like for months that what they wanted to do at the deadline was just take on bad contracts and get future assets, which is what Trajan has talked about wanting to do since he was hired. But them being as good as they were kind of made them shift strategies a little bit to where they tried to do a little bit of both when they got like 3 second-round picks, but then also got Dan Schroder to help them with the current time. So they 100% did not expect to be nearly as good as they are right now, which I think is obviously it's a good problem to have, or I don't even know if you'd call it a problem, but a good surprise to have, if you'd want to say. The only expectations that I have for this team this year is to break the playoff streak, which is since 2008, or they've gone, what is it now, 17 years, 16 years without a playoff win. Don't have to win a playoff series, just win a playoff game. I think they can do that. I think they 100% can do that. I don't think they're going to be in the play-in. I think they should hold on. Like, I guess that's an expectation or a goal. Hold on to the 6th seed or higher. I think they can do that. And then win a playoff game. Like, if you win a playoff series, I mean, that would be insane if they pulled off that. I don't know how realistic that is, but if they pulled that off, that would be absurd. That'd be crazy. But simply the year after winning 14 games, the year after having the worst season in Pistons history, and seeing just how, like, I still have a newspaper in my, I think I put it away. I have the newspaper after they broke the streak, The newspaper in Detroit was some of the most depressing stuff you've ever seen in my life. Like it was terrible. And then just a year later, for you to break the 16, 17 year long playoff drought without a playoff win, I mean, I think that would shatter any expectation or goal or happiness or anything with this season. So that's the only goal I got for this team: win a playoff game and end that drought.
There it is, man. That makes me feel bad for Blake Griffin. You're telling me Blake didn't get that playoff win then if we're going back to 08? Because I remember, I think it was an 8 seed against Giannis, or was it maybe?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
They must have got swept.
Blake is probably my favorite Piston ever, favorite Piston season I've had. Next to and Cade starting to this season from Cade's going to probably end up taking that, but like that was probably my favorite Piston for a while, and to see him, kind of sacrifice his career playing on that like Rob Gronkowski like cast in the playoffs. It sucks that he wasn't able to break it for that team, but I think Cade and this team are in prime position to win maybe even more than one playoff game this year.
There it is, and I looked up those numbers for you real quick. I forgot to mention it. The floater and the hook, he's 77th percentile on runners for 1 point per shot, and 72nd percentile on hooks for 1.1 point per shot. About 86 floaters, 64 hook shots. So he's getting a lot of them up, and he's definitely a lot better on those than he is at the rim so far this season. He's 17th, 17 percentile at the rim, which is not what you want. So the idea that he's like putting up these numbers while not necessarily at his peak form as a finisher, and the free throws that you mentioned, like can only go up from there. And I'm glad you mentioned some of the deadline moves, because I think, obviously it's just smart business. Let's bring in some second round picks for basically nothing. And then they add Schroder, who's a real player. Like I've always been a fan of Schroder. Pick and roll maestro. It didn't work right in the Warriors system. They tried it, just not a good fit with the way they play. But, between Cade and Ivey, and I think obviously like pick and roll is at the heart of some of this offense, and you have some rim runners with a beef stew and a Duren and all that. So I think he's a great fit. And how have you seen him as a fit so far this year with some of the players that I mentioned? Obviously it's small sample; it's only been 5, 6, 7 games or however many. But what have you seen him meshing with the team so far? Because from just the couple games I've seen with them, it seems like a clean fit. Just as a veteran role guy you can trust to run the offense.
Yeah, I thought the first few games was a bit of a struggle for him. It didn't look like he was, obviously he wasn't playing his best. But coming out of the All-Star break, I think he's been great. Even this last game, I think he shot like 1 of 6 or something, but got to the free throw line 8 times, had 4 assists. Before the All-Star break, the main thing I talked about on the podcast was his rim frequency went way down with the Golden State Warriors. It went from I think 27% to like 9% with the Warriors, 27% with the Nets. So the main thing I was watching for was, okay, is that more of the system kind of thing? Or has he just like mid-season lost his burst and ability to get to the rim? And before the All-Star break, he wasn't getting to the paint much, and it was a little bit of a concern for me. But after the All-Star break, since returning, he's been living in the paint. He's been getting to the rim consistently, and that is at the heart of why the Pistons' non-Cade minutes have been putrid all year. When Cade leaves the floor, they don't have anyone else that can penetrate, get to the rim, and then kick out and find the right player and create and make the right decisions off of advantages that they're creating. They were trying to play Marcus Sasser as a point. He's not able to do that. Malik Beasley was trying to have the ball in his hands. He's not much of that kind of player. And a lot of their offense just resolved around DHOs around the perimeter, and it never once, like, the ball would not touch the paint. And that was just terrible for the offense. With Schroder, though, he's been consistently getting to the paint, and he's been consistently finding open guys and creating for other dudes. So I think that's been great, especially the last few games from him. I think it's been much needed. The bench lineups with him have been far better than they were with Sasser. I think the bench lineups have been outscoring by like over, I think it was 3 points per 100 possessions. And with Sasser, they were just getting obliterated. It was just bad. So I think he's been a good addition. One of the areas that I saw in this last game against the Nets, or not the Nets, against the Clippers, that I thought was really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing, and we're recording this right before the Celtics game. I'm looking forward to see it in this game and moving forward. The JB Bickerstaff decided to run a lineup of him, Ausar, and Schroder, and they all just kind of took turns guarding Harden. And I feel like I kind of knew this, but it didn't really like hit me. I wasn't really thinking about it or noticing it really since he joined the Pistons. But Schroeder's always been an annoyance on defense. Like, he always just tries to get on people's nerves and always getting up in your grill. And he was doing that against Harden. Even when they got the switch off of Ausar, you have Schroeder bugging him 94 feet, denying him off ball, grabbing him, sometimes fouling him, but you're wearing him out and getting under his skin. And then when he leaves you, he got Ausar Thompson now on him. Like, it's just like he was just getting put in a torture chamber all night because of the amount of tension they were giving him off ball. So I think Schroeder's been pretty good for the Pistons. I think what he's brought to the team is exactly what they've needed. And he's even done better defensively than I thought he was. And I think you're starting to see him, get more and more comfortable with this team and providing what they need.
Yeah, he can be a real pest, and even if defensively, and even if it's just a short-term move, like I think especially like the awareness that Jaden Ivey's out and he can do some of the things that you're talking about that this team needs when Cade's not on the floor, and you're missing one of those guys. So like being able to bring in a veteran that you can trust, plug and play to break down the paint a little bit, break down the defense, and be able to just initiate pick and roll, hit the lob man, hit the kick out, score a little bit, but. That it's just a perfect like short-term move, like for free, just to bring in a guy that can kind of help fill out the rotation and handle a lot of those responsibilities that you're talking about. So I thought it was just a really smart move for a team that needed that type of player to come in and fit, compared to like the Warriors just kind of bringing in a talent, and it wasn't like considering fit at all, I guess, or filling a need at all. It was just a talented guy, because we know what Schroeder could do. I mean, especially overseas when he's unleashed with Germany and the Franz Wagner and Daniel Tice, I believe that whole team. I mean, they're unreal. That chemistry. They've been running that FIBA World Cup and those FIBA teams for like years now. He probably has hundreds of games together with those guys. So as a Magic guy, I wanted Orlando to like pry in and maybe bring him in, especially just for how easy it seemed to get him. Like just. He brings a little bit of a pull-up three-point threat, and everything we mentioned, can run the offense. So just a smart player, smart move, and just really liking what they did at the deadline, because it was just small incremental wins on a team that's already on the rise. So I thought it made a lot of sense. And one other question here that I'd love to hear about your thoughts on is Ron Holland and your impressions on him as a rookie. I don't really have any stats. I think it can be a little much to judge most rookies on any impact stats or true shooting numbers. It's more about just like what skills have you seen so far from him that you think will translate, and how he'll fit in this core around Cade, Ausar, Duren, Ivey, and also, is he the best rookie in this class?
So I don't know if he's the best rookie in this class. I can't go out on a ledge and say that. But I will say I think he's been much better than I thought he would be. Watching him, just to be honest, I don't watch any prospect film until I have to in the summer. I don't like watching college basketball at all. I hate the G League. I think the G League basketball is awful. I hate watching it. A few years ago, I loved watching Amen and Ausar, but my God, the OT basketball was terrible. But those two guys were probably the most fun I've had watching prospects. So they made up for it because of how crazy they were. But yeah, I don't get into prospect stuff until the offseason. And to be honest, Ron was never on the Pistons' radar or rumored to the Pistons or anything. So I didn't do much scouting on him before the draft. Like he was never on the Pistons' radar, at least from what everyone understood. Even Ron was shocked. I remember we were in the room with him after they drafted him, and they asked him, are you familiar with Detroit at all? And he's like, no, I didn't even know I would be drafted here. I never met with the Pistons. So, like, even he was shocked that he got drafted by the Pistons. With that said, after they drafted him, obviously I went back and watched him. And then watching him in Summer League, I thought he was just incredibly raw and was going to be a really, raw prospect and someone you have to kind of build up moving forward and take your time with. But he's been much better this year than I thought he would. I didn't think he'd be in the rotation instantly, and he's been in the rotation basically all year. His defense has been much better than I thought it would be. I know a lot of people thought he could be good defensively his rookie year. Most rookies, in my opinion, are not good defensively. And I think people kind of got spoiled by how good he was as a rookie. So I was like, okay, don't throw that on Ron. That's not fair. But he actually has been a fine defender. And another one of those guys who just gets in your grill, has that Detroit attitude, constantly trying to, square up with somebody anytime they do something you don't like. Like, people love it. And he's that kind of physical dude. But I think what's been even more impressive to me is especially like in the month of January or something, he was shooting like 35% from deep, which was a really good development to see. The other part of his game, which is I think everyone already knew about, but I thought translated to the NBA quicker than I thought it would, his slashing ability. Like, he can get to the basket whenever he wants, especially in transition. In transition, he's scary. He gets to the basket almost every single time, and the only real way to stop him is if hope he misses once he gets there or foul him. So I think he's going to have a future as a legit scary slasher, as a scorer in the future. And I think there's a potential for an Ausar-Ron duo as your starting wings to be absolutely terrifying. You're going to need one of them to develop some kind of three-point shot, though, if they're going to start together with Duren. You can't have three guys that just aren't shooting. It's not going to happen. One of them has to develop a three-point shot. It looks like it's going to be Ron. Ron looks way farther ahead in his jump shot development. And like I said, he already showed this past month that he was shooting much better and developing in that regard. So, look, I really like Ron. I was not the biggest fan of his at draft time. After watching some film, I was like, this guy's pretty raw. Can't really shoot. Don't know how that's going to fit with Ausar and Duren. And at that time, I had questions about Ivy shooting. But after watching him this year, not only was he better than I thought he was, it feels like he's getting better at each game and each week. As the season goes along, he just keeps getting better and better. I'm pretty high on his future as well. I really like the future of him and Ausar at the wings, especially if Ron develops that three-point shot. I think he's going to be really good.
Man, that's just scary to think about those two out there defensively. Because yeah, I mean, I think you hit on it. Like I thought of Ron Holland as an athlete first and foremost. That that athletic advantage should translate first, and you hit on it. Like the transition, just a monster. Like you're not gonna catch up with him. You're not gonna stop him. Like he is a strong play finisher. The slashing makes a lot of sense, especially in more of a role player role now that you have your superstar in place and maybe some budding stars around him. Like finding guys that move well off the ball, off of that is key. And you hit on it as well, the 3-point shooting. It's interesting because I was a huge Ausar Thompson guy for Orlando back in his draft, mostly because I thought he played more of a catch and shoot off ball role than Amen, where I thought Amen would be more of a point forward type downhill force, and Ausar would be kind of more of like the ultimate complementary guy. And I'm a little surprised that the shooting hasn't hit yet. I forget the numbers, but I don't have them in front of me. But I think it was like he was like 30% from three on a pretty high volume back in either all of his high school or Pinecrest or overtime, and then about 72% as a free throw percent shooter, which is both are a little lower than you would like, but they were both a lot higher than Amen at the time, and it seemed like he was comfortable in that role. So at the very least, like you hit on it with both of these guys to be really positive defenders. And if one of those catch and shoot 3-point shots hits, like good night, because you can start playing them together a lot easier that way. And that's what you want to surround stars with, no matter what they're good at. Pretty much is play finishers that can dribble, pass, and shoot and defend their own position, and ideally you got everybody switching everywhere, 5 out, 1 through 5, and just able to switch everything. But not everyone can do that. But if you slowly find guys that can do most of those things and minimize their holes, you can really build out a competitive contender. That especially being so young, I think some things that translate year to year, especially like this young of a team, is the defense. Like you don't have to worry about like figuring out defense like long term if you have good defenders that are entering their prime years athletically and they're already one of the elite defenses. Like that's something that is pretty bankable along with Cade's production and creation offensively. So like you have your point forward in place, or tall point guard, I should say. I generally view it as whoever you're guarding is your position, but either way there. And then you have your defense in place. You have a center, a point guard, a couple wings, good complementary guys, good chemistry. I mean, what's not to like? So the Pistons are in a heck of a spot right now, and I'm super excited to see it. And there's some fun role players, like you mentioned Sasser before. I always thought he was a good shooter, so kind of like Beasley. Maybe that's not the right role for him. Maybe he gets he's the odd man out if you're going down the rotation and you have to fill certain roles. Maybe he's the odd man out. And same with like how have you liked Beef Stew Isaiah Stewart in this rotation as well. Like, do you think those guys will be here kind of as a part of this core, or will they might prioritize some other guys in the near future?
I think Sasser will probably 100% be traded in the offseason. I just don't think there's any pathway to him. I think he's been a little worse this year than expected. I think there's questions about, at first, at the beginning of the year, I thought that for sure Sasser is an NBA player. He's just not being played in the right role. I have a little question now about whether he's going to be an NBA player. But if he does have a chance to be an NBA player, it's not going to be in Detroit. They just don't have a pathway to him to play the role that he's meant to play. It's not going to be as a point guard. And they have guys in front of him that are just either one better at what he does or two more important to play. So if he can go somewhere where he's allowed to just be like this off-ball scorer or this, microwave shooter when it comes into the game, instantly just looking for a bucket, you're looking to, ISO on a guy and hit him with the pull-up three. Like, if he's able to just do that and he's not having to worry about playing or passing or playmaking or anything like that, I think that will be his best chance. But I don't think that's going to be in Detroit. So I think Sasser probably will be traded in the offseason. Stu, however, I think Stu might be the best backup five in the NBA. At the very least, might be the best backup or the best defensive backup five in the NBA. At the very least, his defense has been otherworldly. There was a long portion of this season where it felt like that they were just better with Stu on the floor than JD. And JD has really picked up the last month and a half. So no shot to JD anymore. He's playing much better now. But for the beginning of the year, Stu was the best center on the team, and he's been fantastic all throughout the year. I know his box score numbers, aren't like crazy. They're never going to be insane. But his impact is felt almost every single night. That game against the Clippers, the only reason why they win that game is because of that stretch at the end of the third, early fourth, where Stu has like 6 straight rim protection reps that get them out in transition, and they get an easy bucket in transition simply because Stu is able to be one of the best backup rim protectors in the league. Zubac kept trying to post him, wasn't getting anything going on him. Like, Stu is just, he's been much better now that he's been given his defined role. I think that's one of the things that in your rebuild, for anyone listening out there that's a fan of a rebuilding team, that's one of the main things you need to do with your rebuild, is eventually find the right role for your players, not have them trying to be something they're not. I think that's one of the main things that have happened with a lot of players, especially a guy like Sadiq Bey, who was a former Piston. Like, he was someone everyone said was going to be a great shooter, and then they kept trying to make him into a Paul George. Like, people wanted to see him become like the next superstar. And now all of a sudden he's doing ISO stuff, and now he's not as good of a shooter. And now he never developed the off-ball shooting or the movement shooting and whatever. Point being, once you find guys into their legit role and let them focus on the things they're good at and excel at, you start to see their impact. And now that Stu isn't asked to be a power forward, trying to be this 4 playing next to James Wiseman and Jalen Duren, and isn't asked to be like a starting center in the NBA. Now that you have him playing his role as a backup 5, his value has went through the roof. So I think Stu's been great this year. I think he's been one of their best players. I definitely think he's going to be around this team for a while, unless, anyone's tradable. I think the Luka trade obviously just showed us like literally anyone can be traded. But the only way I can see Stu being traded or not part of this team is if he's part of a deal that gets them that next piece that they need, which, you eventually have to make those type of moves. But unless that happens, he's going to be on this team for a long time.
Yeah, Stu reminds me of just one of those guys you would love to play with, but hate to play against. Like, he's bringing that energy that nobody wants to mess with, and just a classic tough guy role that has found his role. And almost the flip side of that coin in Orlando is it reminded me of Mo Wagner finally kind of becoming the play finisher for the bench unit, and ended up being, before he went down to injury, he was the best big man scorer among any bench players in the league at about 13 points a game. Like, clearly Orlando's 6 man, like a reliable guy, but found his niche, found his role as a play finisher, rim roller, pick and pop guy that can, and also against second units doesn't necessarily have to be as impactful as a defender. So, did we hit enough on Jalen Duren? Because I want to make sure we give him some credit too. Was there anything else about Duren's development? And I know you mentioned, especially the last month or so, but I'm just glad he finally is blossoming, because I thought it was huge value at the pick where they got him back in the draft, and all this turmoil, all the roster turnover has been a little confusing of whether or not they're going to utilize him. But finally, the Ivy Duren pairing, and now Cade and Duren pairing, what do you love about Duren and kind of what he's bringing right now?
I think the main thing with JD is that defensively, he still has a lot of work to do. I think he's over the last month and a half since Ausar came into the starting lineup, he's been much better. I think just simply playing with Ausar will make anybody better, as long as you just are giving effort and focus each possession. I think that's the biggest improvement for him defensively, is that he's just been giving more consistent effort on a play-by-play basis. It's not spotty. It's not times he's just, in no man's land. He may not be a great defender, but over the last month and a half or so, at least he's attentive and at least he's active and bringing that effort, especially on the glass. So I think that's been a huge improvement for him. Again, being able to play next to Ausar has made his life a lot easier defensively and allows him, to kind of develop on that end and focus more on what he's good at offensively. I think the biggest plus I would say or the biggest like positive about JD's season this year, when you're looking long-term building wise, one of the questions I had all offseason was, can JD and Ausar Thompson play together? Because we saw at times last year they were able to, and there was times that last year it just did not look good. But once they had got Simone Fontecchio at the deadline, there was a very small sample, but it was a very small sample that it was working. So I wanted to see, could they play together? So if you look at their 5-man lineup, since Ausar was put into the starting lineup, him, Cade, Ausar, THJ, and Tobias, that 5-man lineup is outscoring teams by 9.1 points per 100 possessions. Like, they're just obliterating teams with those guys on the floor. So the fact that he's getting better with Ausar defensively, and then offensively, they're developing and figuring out not only just to survive offensively, like that lineup is really good offensively. They have, 118.8 offensive rating. So they're not just skating by the skin of their teams. Like, they're actually thriving on that end. And it's because JD has been trusted again to have the ball in his hands. And instead of like at the beginning of the year, he's making better decisions. He's making better passes. He's processing the game like he was as a rookie instead of trying to force some stuff when he doesn't need to. He's playmaking. There was a play, and I'll wrap it up with this, but there was a play against the Clippers, man, and it's not one of those plays that's going to pop up in the highlight reel, SportsCenter top 10, but it's one of those plays that just reminds you, okay, this is why he's different, and this is the kind of stuff he was doing as a rookie, and why it was so puzzling at the beginning of this year, why it just was not happening at all. But there was a play against the Clippers where he gets an offensive rebound, takes a pump fake, takes another dribble, tries to power himself in, takes a pump fake. There's 3 guys around him. And most bigs in the NBA, when they get an offensive rebound, it's like, oh, this is my shot. I'm the one who got this rebound. I'm going up with this. Like, it's just, we wouldn't even have this possession if it wasn't for me getting this rebound. I'm going up with this. It's my time. And instead of doing that, JD pump faked, and it looked like he was going to, but then he kicked out to a wide open corner shooter from Malik Beasley, gets easy 3 points. That's not like a highlight ready play, but it's those kind of processing and decision making that separates you from other fives, other bigs in the league, that you're able to create open shots like that for your team because you have a high level of processing and better decision making. So him and Ausar are fitting together, and he's making much better decisions with the ball in his hands. Also, the Pistons ran like 2 inverted pick and rolls with him at the high post. Had I think it was THJ coming off a pin down. It looked like he was coming around to get a dribble handoff, but instead set a backdoor screen for JD, and he just took someone to the rim. Like, he's special. He has special talent with the ball in his hands. So he's been so good the last month and a half, and he went from majority of the year, at the beginning of the year, talking about should he be starting still, to now at this point saying, how much are you going to give him on a contract extension? So I'm happy for JD. I'm happy for the team. And the fact that him and Ausar are playing so well together, I think is the biggest light at the end of the tunnel you can think of for the Pistons this year.
Yeah, I mean, just sounds like he's making winning plays like that. Just a smart player out there, and I'm sure it's nice to have a guy like Ausar Thompson that brings that energy and sets the tone where it's like you feel like you're slacking if you're not matching that energy of getting out there and showing it all. So I'm sure with Stewart as well. So that's a mean combination when they're available. So I'm glad to see it. Happy for the Pistons. Happy for you getting to see that after a 14 win season last year and everything Detroit goes through. Us Eastern Conference tanking team fans over here, we know the ups and downs of the league very well. So it's always nice to arrive early and just enjoy the spoils. This is the best time where there's no expectations. It's just fun basketball. Let's see how far we can go. No one thought we'd be here, and let's win a playoff series or so. Detroit basketball. Let's see it. So thanks a lot for taking the time today, Ku. It's been a lot of fun talking hoops. Always down to talk basketball anytime.
Appreciate it, man.
You know what? Have a good one. Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.